So good evening, everyone. I'm honored to be here. As I tell people in the spirit of full disclosure, I'm a Rotarian by marriage. So my wife is the member, and of course, because she is very active and very energetic, I get sucked into a lot of stuff that has been a great pleasure for me. So I've set a really challenging objective for my talk tonight. My intention is to illustrate how the four-way test is used to address what I've come to understand as Rotary International's biggest challenge: how to sustain and grow club membership. And I'm going to attempt to do this in like 15 to 30 minutes. I realize that all of you, thank you. I realize that all of you are full of good food, and you probably, let's let him go by. All right, thank you. So I realize that all of you are full of good food, and then you've probably imbibed more than one libation, and then I'm standing between you and the hospitality period. So I have no illusions, I'm going to be brief. If I were to ask most people to describe the characteristics, if I lose this, I'm dead, guys. If I were to ask most people to describe the characteristics of a typical Rotarian, I suspect that their answer might be a white, retired Christian man. I realize that this is certainly not entirely true, but I'm hoping that it's approximately true enough so that you're willing to hang with me so I can make my case. I especially beg the forgiveness of all you ladies in the audience who are active and deeply committed Rotarians. And I'm going to talk a little bit about your gender a little later in this talk, and I hope you appreciate that. My point is that there's a universe of people out there who don't fit those characteristics, and they've got to be attracted to Rotary membership if our clubs are to sustain and grow. For purposes of tonight's conversation, I'm labeling those people as the other. I myself am an other. I'm white and I'm male, as you can see, but I'm not Christian. I'm a Jew. And at various times since I've moved to Washington 40 years ago, I've been the only Jew in this town, a town that I've grown to truly love and appreciate. I'm also not retired, although I'm in the age bracket of most people. My work as an executive and business coach keeps me very busy and stimulated and hopefully of some use to the community. So with these ideas in mind, I want to articulate the challenge in a little bit of an amended way to this. How do we enroll the other into Rotary Club membership so that they become long-tenured Rotarians engaged in contributing their unique talents to fulfilling the Rotary mission? So what is the connection between the four-way test and this challenge of enrolling the other? To answer that question, I want to take you on a short detour into the domain of ontology. Now, don't confuse oncology with a C, which is the technology of cancer, with ontology with a T, which is the technology of being. In my work as an executive and business coach, ontology is my domain of expertise. To get at what ontology is all about, I want you to consider that contrary to popular opinion, you and I are not stimulus response organisms. We are stimulus meaning-making response organisms. So what I mean by that is, when we're subjected to a stimulus, it's not the stimulus that produces our behavior. It's the meaning that we have about the stimulus that produces our behavior. Let me try to illustrate this way. When I say the word millennial, what comes up for you? Some of you are probably thinking spoiled, entitled, impossible to please new employees in my workforce, right? I see some head shaking, huh? Right? Others of you might be thinking socially conscious, technology obsessed, leaders of the future, but then it's like, are we really ready for them to assume leadership? Right? Kind of get the idea? That's what I want you to keep in mind. What's interesting is I'm betting that none of you, when I said the word millennial, thought to ask or to think about what are the years, their birth years, that make them a millennial. And just, in case any of you have asked that question, it's people that were born between 1981 and 1986, according to the official definition. Another interesting example of this meaning-making phenomenon is to compare the same chapter and verse in different Bible sources. You might get together with some friends, all bring your Bibles to a central location produced by different publishers more than likely, and then pick a passage. Pick a passage in the Gospels, or pick a passage in one of the many letters that Paul wrote, and compare the translations of the same passage. You will be amazed at how different they are, particularly if the publisher represents a different denomination. Yeah? Since we're talking about the Bible, you might find it interesting that in the first 5 books of what you refer to as the Old Testament, and we Jews call the Torah, there's an interesting and recurring reference to the stranger or the other. The Torah, as you may know, is fundamentally about God's revelation of the rules, or what we call the mitzvot, as we refer to them in Hebrew, for building a just and gracious social order. Many of those rules have to do with the treatment of strangers, or as they are called in Hebrew, the ger. There are over 40 repetitions of these rules in the Torah. Here's an example of one from Leviticus chapter 19, verses 33 and 34. When a stranger lives with you in your land, do not mistreat him. The stranger living with you must be treated as one of your native born. Love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Notice that God uses the fact of the Jews' enslavement in Egypt as the justification for the rule. I think it's a good reminder that we all have been or will be an other at some point in our lives. And so learning to interact effectively and humanely with the other in our community is worthwhile in addition to being kind. One more thing before we get to the 4-way test. There is a sorting phenomenon going on in our country, which is making the enrollment challenge that we're dealing with here in Rotary even more difficult to address. People are physically moving into communities that are made up of others with identical mindsets and lifestyle choices. The data that supports this trend is described in a fascinating book called The Big Sort by a journalist named Bill Bishop. What Mr. Bishop did with the help of some sociologist colleagues was to examine presidential elections as far back as 1952. I know no one was alive then but me, and you may remember that in 52 it was Dwight Eisenhower versus Adlai Stevenson who were running for president. What they were interested in, the researchers, what they were interested in was the number of electoral precincts in which one party won 20% or more of the popular vote in that precinct. They weren't concerned with which party won, only the margin of victory of the winner. There are over 3,000 electoral precincts in our country. Back in 1952, even though Eisenhower won by a landslide, overall, there were only about 50 precincts where the margin of victory was 20% or more. In recent presidential elections, that statistic has changed drastically. For example, in the 2008 election, the number of districts in which the winner garnered 20% or more of the precinct vote exceeded 2,500. This is a powerful illustration of how we are sorting ourselves into homogeneous tribes that keep us insulated from interacting with the other. It's a dangerous situation because sociologically and anthropologically, the research suggests that isolated tribes such as these are prone to extremism, which is being reflected in the growing level of demonization that's occurring in our political discourse and quite possibly the rash of mass shootings that occur in our country every year. So, with the notion of human beings as meaning-making organisms, and the data that suggests that as a country we're sorting ourselves into homogeneous tribes, let's examine how the four-way test can help us address the Rotary membership challenge that I've described. Remember how I've articulated the challenge. How do we enroll the other into Rotary Club membership so that they become long-tenured Rotarians engaged in contributing their unique talents to fulfilling the Rotary mission? The first element of the four-way test, as you all know, is it the truth? This question begs another question. What is the truth? In today's world of fake news and the use of information to demonize another, it's not an easy question to answer. I'd like to offer a possible answer for your consideration. I believe that what we are being asked to consider by this element is not some moral absolute that came down on stone tablets from Mount Sinai, like don't kill, don't steal, don't commit adultery, or the like. What I invite you to consider is that when we are enrolling people into the possibility of Rotary membership, we need to understand their truth. Their truth is based on their meaning-making and how that meaning-making has been reinforced by their life experience to become their beliefs. To be good at enrollment, we need to bring a sense of curiosity and neutrality to the conversation with another. Not a sense of resistance, or worse, that will generate a feeling of alienation or being negatively judged on the part of the person we're trying to enroll. We have to use open-ended questions to invite the person to fully express in such a way that they feel gotten in the conversation. The truth is that an other will have their very own personal and individual reasons for wanting to become a Rotarian. And they will have their own unique approach to using their talents to contribute to the Rotary mission and the club agenda. These reasons and approach to contributing may well be very different than those of the white male retired Christian majority member cohort. We must be able to understand this uniqueness and help the enrollee to see how that uniqueness can fit the agenda of the club we are enrolling them into. The way we do this is to see the membership role through their eyes and look for unknown advantages and strengths from having members with their unique perspectives. If we remain focused on our reasons for joining and our pet Rotary projects, we will unconsciously send an unwelcoming message to the people we are trying to enroll. I want to share what you might consider a rather unusual example of what I mean. In the book of Genesis, when God is creating the world, in a manner of speaking, he creates the first other. That other is Eve, ladies. In chapter 2, verse 18 of Genesis, he gives this rationale for her creation as follows. The Lord God said, "It is not good for man to be alone. I will make a fitting helper for him." That is the standard translation of the Hebrew. What's interesting are the words in Hebrew that are translated as fitting helper. Those words are etzer, which means helper, and kenegdo, which means against him. So the literal translation is really, I will make a helper against him. Interesting, huh? Our rabbis explain this as a role they describe as friendly antagonism. In other words, the idea is for Eve to support Adam by challenging him, by helping him see other perspectives. This is the value that an other can bring to an organization or a community. Coming from a totally different set of life experiences, meaning-making, and beliefs, the other can contribute a whole new perspective that enriches the problem-solving or goal-setting dialogue. I believe that if we do a good job of getting someone else's truth, the other elements of the four-way test will simply fall into place. For example, the second element, is it fair to all concerned? If I'm devoting my energy to really understanding who you are and where you're coming from, I believe you will perceive that as a gift. How about element 3? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? If you're fortunate enough to have had the experience of being deeply listened to and having your beliefs deeply understood, I think that you too will recall the sense of goodwill and friendship that you felt toward the person who gave you that experience. Finally, will it be beneficial to all concerned? I think there's no greater benefit than taking time out from our typical warp speed transactional lives to simply stop and deeply listen to another person in a human being to human being interaction. When this happens, I'm confident that both parties in the interaction will benefit. In closing, I want to share another story from my Jewish rabbinical tradition. A man was lost in the woods and was becoming frantic in his efforts to find his way out. Suddenly, he heard a noise, and out of the underbrush, another man came into the clearing where he was standing. "Hey," he said, "do you know the way out of here?" The other man looks at him, breathing heavily. "I don't know the way out, but I can tell you one thing, that way is bad news." The point of this story might best be made by the playwright Samuel Beckett, who said this: "My mistakes are my life. In our search for truth, we do not expect to find the answer, but we can help each other avoid dead-end paths. This is why we need each other." Thanks for listening. I hope I've given you some food for thought. If you'd like to explore these ideas experientially in a little more depth, I invite you to join me at the short workshop I'll be facilitating tomorrow. I call it Wholehearted Communication, and I'll be asking everyone who shows up to share two things. First, what was it that jazzed you enough about Rotary to join? And second, what is it that jazzes you about being a Rotarian that has you stay engaged? Everyone else will be invited to listen to the person sharing in a way that stimulates their full self-expression and has them feel gotten. Come on out and play tomorrow.